The Gallup poll found for the first time that the black recipients assessed the United States black and white relations as somewhat or very bad. Today I want to talk about the need to stop the killing of unarmed black people. I've been in law enforcement for the past 8 years and a detective for the past year. I have seen and traveled the world, and I have truthfully seen how black people are viewed in different cultures, and myself being a subject victim of racial bias. Today I'm going to talk about why is it important to discuss racial prejudice and discrimination, the need to reverse systematic racism, and also by doing those things, how important it would ultimately be to have a truly diverse and inclusive country. Unfortunately, racial discrimination is defined as treating someone unfavorably because he or she is a certain race or because of the personal characteristics associated with their race. Racial discrimination has been a reoccurring theme within the United States. The U.S. unfortunately allowed an open generation of white Americans to encompass and embrace racial discrimination as well as segregation. During the Civil Rights Movement, white Americans truthfully believe that segregation is better than integration. And that caused a social environment that made the view of black Americans as lesser and uneducated. It was said by Quillen in 1995 that although expressions of prejudice and discrimination sharply declined, progress in reducing racial inequality was especially large in racial gaps in employment, housing, wealth, health, and the criminal justice system. Historically, it was unfortunate, but even in the present, we have a new form of racial discrimination, and that is extreme subtle microaggressions. And microaggressions cause a underlining uncomfortable essence, if you will. Racial microaggressions are the everyday slights, insults, put downs, invalidations, and offensive behaviors that people of color experience in daily interactions with generally well-intentioned white Americans who may be unaware of their intentions, demeaning and undervaluing the group that they are talking about. And so here we have a picture of a person, of a social media influencer on Instagram who is clearly white, and she found that taking upon a new culture and a culture appropriation would enhance her status. And ultimately what that does is that it's saying that I can get the benefits of a race or culture without having to go through the trials and tribulation of that culture. And so I talked about racial discrimination, the history and the present, and now I want to talk a little bit more about how reversing systematic racism would ultimately be better. And so when we're looking at reversing systematic racism, in order to truly create a inclusive environment for all United States citizens, we must acknowledge there is a large disparity in all areas of the country, ranging from racist ideologies to racist institutions. We have to develop a better understanding by all people, to include white Americans. In order to change these deeply rooted, unspoken systematic oppressions, I believe better training by law enforcement and changing the view of blacks in the media. And so here we have a political cartoon, a Black Lives Matter protester, and a protester that in Michigan, that went to the state house, a government facility, with armed to tooth and nail. But as you see here, that person was labeled a protester. A white man with guns armed to teeth going to a government facility is labeled a protester, while a peaceful protester is labeled a thug. And so it was found by the Washington Post that black men are 5 times more likely to be killed unarmed. So what does that mean? It means that there has to be an understanding by police and law enforcement that they potentially have a racial bias, and that they themselves need to have extensive training to understand that racial profiling is not accepted, nor will be condoned by society or by its own members. So racial profiling is a form of discrimination by law enforcement uses a person's race or ethnicity as a key reason to engage in various acts of enforcement. Profiling violates the basic human rights, undermines the trust in public institution, and has severe consequences to not only the victim but to society at large. So generating new and extensive training to help and aid law enforcement understand that this is not okay and that we can eliminate it through understanding one another. And so I talked about reversing systemic racism through better police training and the media a little bit. And now I'm going to talk about having an inclusive country and why it is amazing if we truly embrace a truly diverse nation. So inclusion means moving forward, and acceptance is key for the environment and the country of allowing the nation to heal and grow. I want to ensure and clarify that I'm not attacking white Americans, but I'm simply putting on a demonstration that shows not that every white person is bad, but that as a whole we have to admit that there are unfortunate racial biases and racial discrimination, microaggressions, and almost that could be implemented in everyday life. If you identify as one of those people who you feel attacked, I just ask that you keep listening and you understand that this is not to demean you, but to enhance. It was said by Van Alstyne, a diverse populace provides different perspectives and opportunities for the exchange of new ideas that can stimulate and grow creativity. A diverse mix of people brings together complementary abilities and experience that may lead to productive gains. This picture is Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down on the street after jogging his routine route. Unfortunately, he was stopped by people who potentially had racial bias and racial discrimination, that potentially had profiling innate in their prior occupation. If we truthfully have an inclusive environment, inclusive country, this potentially would never happen again. So in summary, I talked about racial discrimination, reversing systematic racism, and a truly diverse and inclusive country. I want you to get out of this to admit that you potentially have a racial bias, and that if you want to eradicate that, you have to go talk to someone that does not look, believe in the things that you are or who you are. So that is my challenge. To fix these things, you must admit you have a racial bias and go out to interact with people who do not look like you.